Hi. In the last video, we discussed pipeline and parallel pattern, which is an advancement over single agent and router patterns. In the parallel and pipeline pattern, the system has the ability to call multiple agents across different steps. However, there is one problem with the parallel and pipeline pattern in that the control flow or the steps are decided by the human software engineer while designing the system. So the steps are exactly fixed, how the system will work, how the data flow happens from step 1 to step 2, those steps are exactly fixed. What is the problem with that? So in systems or in problems where you need to solve for a fixed set of steps, that you will get this particular problem and you have to follow a fixed set of steps in order to solve that problem, parallel and pipeline pattern works perfectly well. However, in some ambiguous or high level or more complex systems or queries, you need a system that is more autonomous. So you need to provide the ability to the LLM in order to find the exact steps to solve the problem. You cannot decide those steps in advance during design time. You can see that while moving across these patterns from single agent, moving on to pipeline and parallel to the orchestrator, more control is being given to the language models, moving from the human control. So the orchestrator works on the weakness of parallel and pipeline pattern in which the steps or the plan is decided by the language model across different loops. So this is one and done pattern. This is also one and done pattern. Query does something, return the response. Same for this, but the orchestrator is a pattern that works in loops. Let's see how. So what happens is the query comes to the orchestrator. What does it do? It essentially plans how to solve that problem, decides the steps exactly that are needed to solve the problem, then does solve the first step with the help of one or more agents, step 1, then looks at the solution or the response of step 1, assesses or evaluates the response, assesses the response. On the basis of the response of step 1, decides the next steps of the plan. So if we are on step 2 right now, this step gives replanning to step 3, 4 and all the subsequent steps. It does not change the previous steps, the responses to the previous steps, step 1, step 2. Those are fixed, but only resets or replans the next coming steps in order to solve it. So this happens in a loop until the orchestrator thinks that the problem is solved. We finally have the answer and we can consolidate the responses to all the previous steps into a one final draft and return that to the user. So you see here that orchestrator is more autonomous here. It has more control. It works more like a manager that has different employees, which are different agents, and uses those employees, takes help from them to be able to solve the query. We also saw that pipeline and parallel worked more like an employee, not a manager, in that it was provided the exact flow, step 1, then step 2, step 3. However, it was provided the flow well in advance and had to strictly follow the flow, while the orchestrator has more flexibility to decide the flow. One clear distinction I want to make in this, that there are two ways orchestrator works. One is the way we discussed, that it plans the whole number of steps, the entire plan, how to solve that problem, and then works on those steps one by one, and then changes subsequent steps after each step, reassesses, and then replans. However, in a lot of practical systems like these, the orchestrator is made more simple in that it decides only the next step and not all of the subsequent steps. So during the planning phase, it would just decide the next step. So step 1, solves for step 1, assesses that step, assesses that step and decides step number 2, then solves for step number 2. and step 3, 4, 5 and whatever subsequent steps are not considered at all. So only one step at a time. That is how the planning is done and not the whole plan. Why it does that is because the biggest reason is that the plan changes every time after every loop. So what's the point of deciding the whole series of steps if we are going to change that anyway? So that's how an orchestrator works. There is one very big weakness to orchestrator is that even though it works in a loop, even though it is very flexible, it decides its own plan and solves for that plan, even though it has access to all the agents that are in the system with different tools, even then the orchestrator just solves for the problem and returns the final draft to the user. It has no way to evaluate if the draft is good enough or not. What is if the final draft that is being shared with the user is not up to the standards, is not able to solve the problem, has some bug, or even missing one particular task within the problem, within the solution? Or if it's long enough or short enough or not in the right tone. So what happens in such cases? We need a evaluator loop in such cases, about which we'll learn in the next video. So I hope this video gives you a good understanding of why we need orchestrator pattern and what is the weakness of that orchestrator pattern that we'll solve in the next video.